Steve Phelps made some comments about NASCAR's future, and boy, is it causing some controversy. Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Jet. Welcome back to Sidelines. This is going to be 2 episodes in a day at least, maybe even 3. We have another episode coming out at around 10 a.m. This video is coming out 1 a.m., 2 in the morning, so this is a late nighter for y'all. But yeah, we have a lot of stuff to talk about regarding Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR. Now, over the weekend, he attended the 4th annual Race Industry Week. It was a webinar basically to talk about the future of NASCAR and where it's headed. And he gave some quotes that raise a lot of eyebrows, whether in a good or bad way. It depends on how you see it. Let's first talk about one of the big things, and that is the charter system. Now, Steve Phelps made some comments about the fact that he was blunt by saying race teams, they're not making profit. They're not profitable right now. And that currently at the moment, at least what Steve Phelps described it, race teams, they want to be able to accomplish 3 different things. Number 1, be competitive on the racetrack. Number 2, increase the enterprise value of their charters. And number 3, have a path to making profit. Currently at the moment, only 2 of those, at least according to Steve Phelps, have been checked. And that was being competitive on the racetrack and increasing their value in the charters. But like I said, teams aren't making any profit. Doesn't matter if you're 2311, Trackhouse, Hendrick, Gibbs, no teams are making profit. Now, Steve Phelps, as a way to solve that third box that needs to be checked in order to make teams profitable, he gave 2 solutions. The first one, of course, is the media rights. Teams want a bigger piece out of the pie. I believe the way the contract is set up, or something along those lines of the TV contract that we're currently under, is I believe 65% or so of the contract of the TV money goes to the racetracks. I think 25% or so goes to the teams, and then 10% or so goes to NASCAR. Teams want and deserve a bigger piece of that pie, so you have to do that. We've heard that NASCAR, they're talking with Fox and NBC, they're expected to return. Them now talking to Turner Sports and Amazon Prime streaming platform. When streaming comes into play, you know that they're gonna make sure that NASCAR gets bank on that. So because of that, the current $8.2 billion contract, whatever the deal is for 2025, is going to be a lot more expensive. And teams are going to want to make sure they get a bigger piece out of that pie. He gave a second option, which, let's just say, again, raise some eyebrows. Second, and not small, honestly, is some type of cost containment. So whether that's in the form of a cap, or whether that's in the form of the parts and pieces that make up the next-gen car, or trying to limit those pieces. I don't know where we're going to net out on that. I'm not suggesting that our race teams can cut their way to success. I'm not suggesting that because I've been accused of that in the past. Okay, so the second part, by the way, fancy word here, containment, cost cap. Let's just be real with it, cost cap. I understand the idea of a cost cap, but I don't think it's really necessary because teams are already cutting so much. We've already cut out so much away from track time, practice, qualifying. We already cut away so much from that. We already cut away so much from the teams in general. They had to let go a lot of people because in the Gen 6 era, you build your own cars, fabricators. You had all this stuff to all these people to build your cars in-house. Well, now with the next gen cars being built really outside of the shop, you buy the parts in and you basically just assemble them like Lego pieces. So you don't need a lot of people to buy parts that are at a shop, but you just bring them in, stick them in together and go race. Obviously, it's more complex than that, but you get what I'm saying. So teams are already cutting so much down already. They're already having to, I don't want to say go bare bones, but there's a lot less people in the garage, way less people in the garage now than there was even 5 years ago. So now wanting to have teams go to even further, cut even more costs by giving them a cost cap or cost containment, so to speak, I just don't feel like that is the right way to go. Again, I know he says that you can't cut your way to success, but that's what we're doing. We keep cutting costs. And it's kind of interesting when you look at NASCAR, what have they been doing to try and bring in new audiences to get, a bigger audience? They've been spending money. They spent $1 million a year on LA. They spent God knows how much money on Chicago. You do that. You have to spend money to make money. That's usually how it works. If you want a business to grow, you spend money to make money. But the way I see NASCAR with these and how they're dealing with teams is like they're trying to keep cutting. Even though Steve Phelps said, you know, we don't want you to cut to success, yet that's what we've been doing ever since we went to the next gen car. That's what we've been doing since we've been limiting practice and all this stuff to help teams save money. Keep cutting. But it gets to a point where it's like, we've already cutting so much. What else is there to cut? Again, I know he's not suggesting that. He even said he's been accused of that in the past. I know he's not suggesting that, but again, when it comes to cutting, even when you look at the way our sport is already, I just don't think it is necessary to keep cutting. I just think the best thing is to just give teams more piece of the pie, because then that can solve a lot of problems. Number one, if you give teams more money, that means they don't have to rely so much on sponsorship, meaning you can have more consistent sponsorship. Instead of having Kyle Busch running 12, 13 different paint schemes, he could maybe rely on just 2 paint schemes, 3 Chi and Cheddars. You can have more consistent paint schemes, meaning more brand identity, more recognizable identity for the fans. On top of that, because teams are getting more money in general, that means they don't have to rely so much on paid drivers that have a buttload of sponsorship, and instead focus on drivers with actual talent. Again, if you just give teams more money, it's going to solve a lot of problems and not having to force them to cut costs all around. I just don't think that's the way to go. Another interesting part about that part of his speech there was the fact that it looks like NASCAR has changed their mindset on charters. It looked as though that in the beginning, there was always this sort of brick wall. Teams wanted charters permanent, NASCAR did not. Now, as a fan, I don't like charters because that basically, if charters become permanent, that just basically closes off anyone new from entering to NASCAR unless you're drowning in green. That's the only way. So as a fan, I hate charters being permanent, but if you're a team owner, I understand why you want it permanent. You spent so much money, you've invested so much money into these charters, of course you're gonna want it permanent. NASCAR was on the side, especially with Jim France, was always on the side of we don't want it permanent. In fact, we don't like charters in general. But it seems as though that Steve Phelps specifically has changed his stance in that they are now going all in with the charters, which is interesting considering with the TV media rights, how that will stack up in terms of when the media rights get agreed to be signed, as well as when the charter agreement is signed. Next up, we're going to talk about is Phelps on the schedule. Now, one thing he said for sure, NASCAR is not going to expand, nor looks like it's not going to decrease the amount of races. It's still going to remain 38 races in total from February to November. Personally, I mean, again, I would like to see less races on the calendar. I think less is more. It gives fans and drivers time to breathe and actually slow down a little bit. I'm not saying we need a 4-week break or so like what Formula One does, but it would be nice to have just more one week breaks within the season, just to give, again, fans, teams, drivers in general, just a little bit of time to rest and be able to really cherish the season instead of having consistent racing every single week. Fans and drivers all around can have a tendency to maybe just get tired, just get drained out by the end of the season. But again, that's just my opinion. I think sometimes less is more. I love racing, love NASCAR, don't get me wrong. But if you look at this off season, I've actually kind of enjoyed it. Just even though I love NASCAR, it's good to take a little break every now and then. So even though I would like for NASCAR to decrease the amount of races to maybe just 30, 38, fine, whatever, it is what it is. But one thing he did talk about was maybe the changing of schedule in terms of how many racetracks get dates. He said that an emphasis remains on tracks to sell out, noting that if a track with 2 races does not sell out, the sport has shown it will move one of those events elsewhere. Although he did make an exception for tracks where the racing is extraordinary, he cited Daytona, noting that the regular season finale that was not a sellout, while the Daytona 500 does. So if that gives you an idea, more than likely Atlanta will still be getting 2 races, which again, I do not agree with, but I do agree with the fact that racetracks, there should not be maybe 2 or 3 tracks that should have 2 dates. Daytona and maybe Talladega, but that's it. I would even argue maybe Daytona should be the only track that has 2 dates, but I would look at tracks like Kansas, tracks like Richmond, again, Atlanta, Las Vegas, where I think they would benefit greatly from going to 1 race. Kansas, The racing is fantastic, but look at the stands. Barely anyone shows up, especially for the spring race. Again, I would compare it to like this. You eat, let's say there's a big piece of chocolate cake. You eat half of that chocolate cake and you say, oh, okay, I'm good. Why should I give you then another full chocolate cake if you won't even finish the first one? That's how I kind of view it like this. Why should you give tracks another day if they can't even sell out the first one? I understand unless the racing is extraordinary, but I feel like if you look at tracks like Pocono, tracks like Michigan, those racetracks have benefited greatly from going to one race. Pocono, I mean, it's been more fans than ever before because they are able to focus everything on that one race. Same thing with Michigan. You focus everything on that one race. When I look at tracks that have 2 days, especially one in the playoffs, to me, it feels like the first race means nothing. Like Vegas. Which race are you going to put more emphasis on? The second race of the season or the one that's in the playoffs? Obviously, the one that's in the playoffs. Same thing with Phoenix. Same thing with Kansas. You're going to put more emphasis on the one in the playoffs. It just makes sense. I think it would be better overall, create more variety if more racetracks had one day, because then it will force whoever promotes that track to be able to put all their eggs into that one race day to make sure that they sell out. And then maybe, let's say, if you have a track that consistently sells out and there is a very high demand, then maybe you could look at maybe opening it for a second race. But I would be 100% for NASCAR giving racetracks one day and moving their second day to other racetracks, like maybe a Road America or something. I don't know. But I would like to see more variety and less repetition, which I think would enhance the unpredictability of the season. And finally, let's talk about the part that you are all here for. This was the most shocking part of Steve Phelps' speech. I will read it as such. We're going to talk about horsepower. And this is what he said. I don't think the answer is more horsepower because more horsepower is expensive. If you ask a driver what's going to solve it, they're always going to say, give me more horsepower. It's a thing. I'm not a driver, but I listen to enough drivers and that's their solution. So the question is that really what it is? I don't know. I think there's some gearing things that we're looking at as well, some shifting things. Let's calm down. Calm down. Just calm. Are you kidding me, Steve? What do you want? I know I said I was going to be calm, but I can't. Like, what the? I'll use this as an example to compare it. That's like you being a wrestling promoter and you realize, wow, all my wrestlers are getting concussions. Why is that the case? And then you ask the wrestler, hey, how do we stop it? Or how do we limit y'all getting concussions? The wrestler goes, well, maybe if you don't take chair shots to the head, that could help. And you sit there and go, but is that really it? It's like, are you sure? How about you do a flying headbutt instead? It's like, why are you asking? First off, you saying I'm not a driver, that alone should just make you go, shh, stop talking. I'm sorry, but if you want to know how to get good racing, maybe asking the drivers is a good place to start. If every single driver is saying more horsepower, maybe consider that. And it completely is a 180 from the state of the sport just a few weeks ago, where Steve O'Donnell said everything is on the table, including horsepower, to now you saying no horsepower. We're not adding horsepower because it's expensive. Okay, let's use that mindset because it's expensive. According to Denny Hamlin, it's been the same since about 2014. At least the engine bill has not changed at all. Hamlin and Harvick have both stated that.
Worth it to try to get $1 million less engine bill. Are you willing to give up what we're giving up for our on-track product? I just don't think that it's worth it. And by the way, the engine bills have not gone down since we were running 900 horsepower. They're the same. And I know I've talked about this before, but I really, 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 really am pleading with NASCAR, who I guarantee you is listening to this. You got to give us some horsepower back, or RPM, or something
from NASCAR. But I just think with the way that the technology and the parts and everything that we do now, I don't believe that higher horsepower would be that big an issue for the engine manufacturers, and we would take a step back on engine issues. But if a few engines blew up here and there, who cares, right?
I think that's what I don't want to break motors, but I really want them pushed to the limit. Right?
Yeah,
everything about the way I am with racing is like I want the drivers to get out and go, I got nothing left. I want the car to know, I want to know the tires, the brakes, the engine has nothing left. Right?
Yeah, the engine bills didn't go down.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, you can test for that. The engine bills have not gone down since they went to these rules, because you're looking for 1 horsepower. Well, looking for 1 horsepower is actually more expensive than looking for 10.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the windows that you're in,
yeah.
So it really isn't cost effective to keep taking power out, because you're looking for smaller increments to make gains.
Not only that, Hamlin again explained in a tweet saying that add 100 horsepower. Engine guys say they can do that quickly. Doug Yates himself of Roush Yates Engines even said, yeah, we can add 100 or so horsepower. We can do that. Maybe there's something I don't see, and I will admit, I'm not in the intricacies of NASCAR. I'm not inside of that whole thing. Maybe there's something I don't see. But the drivers and at least Doug Yates are all saying, yeah, we could add 100 or so horsepower. Now, I heard someone say that for this car, like I think Brian Kozlowski said, you're going to need 300 horsepower, which that's not going to happen. We run 670. That would bump it up to 970 horsepower. And Doug Yates said, listen, 900 to 1,000 is a whole nother can of worms. I'm not even saying we need to go to 900, but just add 100. 670 to 770, I'm perfectly fine with that. We're already doing so much. Shifting, that also plays a role in it. We need to stop shifting in the corners, because that helps preserves tires. We need to stop doing that. It just messes with the racing and all that stuff. Again, Goodyear and the tires, that also plays a role in it. Martinsville last fall was an improvement, but we still need to do more. I think what NASCAR is doing is right. Take away as much downforce as you can, make the tires as soft as you can, but why not just test it out? Hey, what if we add 100 horsepower? How will that turn out? I don't think it's going to affect, like what Denny Hamlin said, it's not going to affect the bottom line that much. At least if you just test it out. Because I think you can only take away so much downforce. You can only take away so much from the spoiler. We're running downforce as little as they ran in the 80s, for God's sakes. You can only do so much around the car before you just focus on the engine. So the expensive part, again, NASCAR saying one thing, teams, drivers are saying something completely different. All right. Well, now let's talk about the purpose of cutting horsepower. We started cutting horsepower in 2015. The whole purpose of that is to get in a 4th OEM, to attract a 4th OEM. You heard what I just said, right? We've been doing this since 2015. That's been nearly 10 years. 10 years. Keep in mind, having a new OEM is going to take another 2 or 3 years just to even start up. If you look at the countdown to Daytona with Dodge, it took them 2, 3, 4 years to go from start to finish to enter into NASCAR. So if, let's say, Honda says, all right, we're going to enter into NASCAR, it's going to take them, maybe 2027 to maybe enter into the sport. And by around that time, when is hybrid engines going to come into play? What is the end goal here? Because again, we've been cutting horsepower for nearly a decade, and we have not had a single sliver, I even hit my mic. We haven't heard a single sliver of news, of hope, or anything like that of a new OEM coming to NASCAR. Not Honda, not Dodge, no one. So what are we doing? What is the purpose? Why is NASCAR so afraid of adding horsepower? That the fact that they won't even try it. Because one of the beauty things I think of NASCAR, and before I get into that, I'm going on a rant here, but I just want to point something out. Horsepower may not be the only, I'm not saying NASCAR should just add horsepower, that would solve all the world's problems, but it would definitely help a lot. This year proved just that. In 2021, we ran 2 engines, 720 and 550. The 550 were on the intermediates, 720 on road courses and short tracks. Now, 2022, with the next gen era, all racetracks at 670. Tracks that got an uptick in horsepower were intermediates. They went from 550 to 670. Those tracks improved greatly, and intermediates became a must-see event that entire year. Road courses and short tracks got a decrease. They went from 720 to 670, and the racing ended up being god-awful. I'm just saying, the tracks that had an uptick in horsepower did great, and the tracks that had a decrease in horsepower sucked. I think that says a lot. One of the things I loved about NASCAR was the speed on the edge, and that includes engines. I love when everything is on the edge, pushed to the limit. I like it when I see engines pushed to the limit. I love it when I see cars and drivers pushed to the limit, especially when it comes to power. I remember the days of qualifying. You heard that engine roar and you would see the cars. It just looked fast. It looked on edge. It looked tough to drive. And I feel like upping the horsepower will separate the good from the great drivers. It puts more, whoever can handle the best car of high horsepower, cars with a lot of horsepower, but extremely difficult to drive, is what really is going to separate who the good from the great drivers are. It made qualifying a spectacle, and it made racing so much fun because you would see these cars. You could really see them just on the edge of spinning out because they had so much speed entering the corner, just barely hanging on. I heard that there was a test at Michigan where NASCAR had that 2014 package with low downforce, extremely low downforce. I can only imagine. Drivers were entering the corner at what, 215 in the 2014 package? And that was with that giant ass spoiler. I can only imagine what that test session would have been like with that low downforce, because at least according to the drivers, they were saying that this is exactly what we need. This is what we need for NASCAR racing. They're the drivers of the sport. They're the ones that are driving the freaking cars. At the very least, maybe go, well, let's try it out. Just a test. Let's see it. I mean, Harvick's 4 car, they did the test in Charlotte. Everyone was running 550. They put in 750. Why not just try it out and just see what happens? Go to the engine builder. Say, hey, are you willing, or would you be willing to add 100 horsepower but having to deal with X, Y, and Z, whatever comes with it? Would you be okay with that? You can only do so much with aero before you have to actually get down to the engine. Where's the new engine? When are we going to hybrid? What is the future plan here? I do believe when we go to hybrid engines, we will get horsepower back, 900, whatever. But in the meantime, can we do something? That's all I want. That's all. Just try something. Everyone's saying the same thing. Horsepower. We're not saying to go to 900 to 1,000 horsepower. Just add a little bit. Just add some back, please. Just try it out.